So every year, I don't know if you guys know this. This is actually probably the main reason that I moved here from Iowa. No, not quite, but one of them is that there is a trail. It's not Mason. Sorry, Mason. No, there's a trail that's actually really, really close to here called the Pacific Crest Trail. And it runs all the way from the Mexico border to Canada, one continuous trail. It's 2,600 miles long. And every year, about 700 to 800 people set out to accomplish that hike in one go. Takes them, on average, about 6 months that people go and live out of their backpack and hike all the way from Mexico to Canada. And it passes just on the mountains right behind us here. You know, you can be at that trail in like 15 minutes. And one of the biggest obstacles, though, every year along the trail is in the Sierra Mountains when the snow begins to melt and the spring rains come. The little creeks that are there later in the year are raging rivers. Many people, almost yearly, people die trying to cross those streams. They don't have bridges or anything. They're out in the middle of these wilderness areas, and the only way to get through them is to walk through them. Now, I really enjoy hiking, like beyond where like I like to go hiking, but I also listen to podcasts about hiking level of enjoying it, you know, so that even when I can't hike, I can still, you know, be thinking about it. And last year was one of the biggest snowfalls they've had in the Sierra Mountains, and biggest snowfalls we've had around here too. And so they were really, really concerned about these river crossings and what it was going to look like come stream. And so every single one of the hiking podcasts was bringing on all these different specialists and hikers that have done it before and encountered these type of things to talk about how do you walk through these streams with these strong currents. And one of the facts that was mentioned many, many times was that a strong river current only needs to be up to about your knees to be able to sweep your feet from out from underneath you and take you down river. Now, we are in our last week of our series called Current. Right? We have a current here at Generations, and that's found in our purpose statement to gather in community, to grow in Christ, and to go serve the world. That is our flow of a church of what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish. And I hope that, you know, maybe if you haven't got swept away in it yet, that you would step in. You don't have to get in very deep. It'll take you. And but we also want our current to be strong and effective and to make that difference where people, you know, get swept into Jesus by just becoming close enough to us, right? And so to do that, we want our current to be strong, so it has to have good boundaries, because if it's spread really thin, it's not going to make a big difference. And our boundaries that in our borders that we have for our current are our core values. Now, we've talked about 4 of our 5 already. That is simplicity. We believe that the gospel is simple, that the message of Jesus is simple, and following him is simple. And so it doesn't need to be complicated. If it's stuck, like if you're stuck because it feels too complicated, then like let's talk, because it's not as complicated as it feels. We also believe in community. It's kind of everywhere around. We have community groups. We have gathering community in our purpose statement and our core value, because it is important to get with other people and to build a community that becomes a family. We also believe in being authentic. Right? We want to be real. I'm up here, you know, every week speaking, and I try not to make it look like my life is different than yours, and because it's not, right? Us leaders, you guys, we all go through real things in life, and we have real problems, and we all struggle with sin, and we all have great moments, and we all have bad moments, and we just want to be real here about that. We've also talked about engagement. Pastor Noah talked about that we're not just a church filled with bench warmers, but we need everybody to participate to build the kingdom, right? We need all of our body here to make a difference. And today I get to talk about our last one, and that is belonging. This is what we say about belonging here. It says, even if you don't believe what we believe, you belong here and you're accepted here. Jesus stated that the greatest commandment is to love God and to love others. He didn't put a list of restrictions to who is included in that commandment, so we can only do our best to love everyone. We strive to be the best reflection of Christ's love into the world and bring as many people into a life with Jesus as we can. 2 Corinthians 5:15 says, he died for everyone, so that those who receive his new life will no longer live for themselves. Instead, they will live for Christ, who has died and was raised for them. The gospel is meant to be accessible to every person, right? Regardless of background, of history or culture or beliefs. They should be able to come to a place where they can encounter Jesus and be swept in to his current, the things that he has for their life. The church, we believe, should be a place for people of common faith to grow dynamically into our diversity. There's a really popular TED Talk by the author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Repeat that. No, I was kidding. She's actually really amazing. You should look up her TED Talk, but she warns us of the danger of what it means to live a life of single story. As an African little girl, she thought books only contained characters with blue eyes and blonde hair because all she was able to consume were American and British storybooks. She didn't realize that she belonged somewhere. She speaks of how easily we internalize a worldview where people have only one dimension, where people are reduced to stereotypes, as if we are only present within a singular story. Before she was exposed by books by African authors, she could not find a place for herself, a girl with brown skin and kinky hair in a land of stories. Similarly, in the church, we must take care to invite the stories from multiple perspectives. In case any one of our brothers or sisters that are already here or new people who come into the doors would be curious about the Christian faith, we don't want them to struggle to find a place for themselves. In a community where only a single story or a dominant narrative is told, there will inevitably be people who find their voices unwelcome or silenced. This is the case for congregations where a majority of the people come from one demographic. Now, I like that we can look around our church and we see varying ages and cultures and different backgrounds and things here, but we could even do better than this. We each see God through our own set of distinctly cultural and historical and all the things that we grew up with lenses, like our own thing. But it's only when we're able to come together and we could all share our different perspectives that we begin to see God as a whole, right? Because we are a body. Uniformity and similarity, they rob us of the opportunity to experience God more fully. We can be vastly different and still grow together. In fact, I'd probably argue that we can only really move forward by embracing the differences of people among us. Now, today I want to help us all become a church, the church that everyone can belong to. Right? There are groups of people who often do not feel like they belong to church, that maybe they don't even belong in church. And it's probably not what you're thinking, where the people groups that your mind goes to that we're going to talk about today, though this probably will pertain to them as well. But I want you guys to open your ears, open your mind today. Prepare to make some adjustments in your heart and your actions so that we can embrace this core value to help people be swept into the current of Jesus. Right? First, we want to be a place to belong for those people who felt like they were been too doubtful. Now, Frederick Buechner, in his book, The Wishful Thinking, says, whether your faith is that there is a God or that there is not a God, if you don't have any doubts, you're either kidding yourself or asleep. And we've talked about doubts before. We talked about it in my message about community, that we want to become a place that is safe for people to doubt. There's an underlying assumption in our faith journey that it proceeds along one direction, that you're always just becoming more faithful and less doubtful. Right? We use vocabulary like spiritual growth into maturity, which is a very true thing, but we want to see it in this linear way that it only gets better. We don't realize that there's seasons and changes and things that we encounter that doesn't keep it linear like that. I'm reminded of Mother Teresa, who's considered one of these great spiritual giants of our last century or so, revealed in her own journal entries how much she wrestled with doubt. The reality is that the deeper you walk in your faith, the more challenging often things come to believe. Right? The more extreme the differences between the world around us and the kingdom of God become, those usually often require more faith, leading to larger moments of wrestling with doubt. I would argue that if you've never had a large struggle of doubt, that you still have a lot of growth left to you. Early in 2019, this is my story. I had been a believer for 25 years at this time. I had finished Bible school. I'd been a licensed pastor. I'd been in part-time and full-time ministry for over 10 years. And I remember sitting down at a coffee shop with my mentor, my spiritual travel guide, and telling him, I don't know if I actually believe in God anymore. And it was more than just like a thing I was throwing out. It's something I've been pondering on and weighing in and trying to figure out, where do I actually want to stand in this? If you remember, if you were here last week, in 2018, the year before, I had gone through some major depression in my life. I was borderline suicidal, and I was involved in ministry that was more life-taking and not life-giving. And I saw some things behind the scenes of the church that I never thought I would see, and that all started to make me doubt. I started questioning all of these beliefs that I had held to because I realized some of my beliefs were not true, or I had believed them in a wrong way. And it just started to lead me down a whole path and led me to deconstruct my faith. Right now, the word deconstruction, maybe you heard about it, maybe you saw it on TikTok Reels or different things. Overall, it has a really bad rap in the church today. But to be honest, I think Jesus calls all of us to deconstruct our faith at a time. Right? Those moments of doubt are key to deconstructing because it usually means we have a wrong understanding of our faith, and it needs to be torn down to be rebuilt correctly. The main issue is that the church in general has not been a safe place for people to deconstruct and then rebuild. Right? We see their doubt and we see their deconstruction as a reason that they don't believe. Maybe they're not even saved anymore, and we push them out instead of saying, hey, come here, let's talk to these things and let's help you rebuild correctly. I honestly believe if I had not had a safe place to go to and say, I don't know if I believe this anymore, and for him to just say, yeah, let's chat about that. He didn't try and convince me in that moment. He didn't try and argue with me. He just said, yeah, man, I get that. Let's talk. And it was weeks that went by. It wasn't like that day I left with renewed faith and all ready to figure it out again. But if I didn't have that safe place, I don't know if I believe today. But instead, I've been reconstructed to a healthier and stronger faith. Look at how Jesus treated doubting Thomas. I mean, how sucky is it for Thomas that, he doubted one time? He's actually, there's a lot of amazing things he did with faith throughout his life, but he's still just known as doubting Thomas. Man, rough. But in John 20, 24 through 27, it says, one of the 12 disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin. We don't know him by the twin. Just say that. I think he put that in there. Don't call me Doubting Thomas, call me Twin Thomas, They're like, all right, Doubting Thomas. But anyways, he was not with the others when Jesus came, right? This is after Jesus died. He rose again. He visited the disciples. He wasn't there. And so when he finally met up with the disciples, they're like, we have seen the Lord. But he replied, I'm not going to believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands and put my fingers into them. Doubting Thomas could all have been like weird Thomas, right? But doubting stuck. Okay, but he wants to place his hand into the wound in his side. It says 8 days later, so 8 days have gone by, and the disciples were still together. They were together again, and at this time Thomas was there with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. Peace be with you, he said. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer, believe. And not only did Jesus show up and just confront his doubt in a healthy way, he didn't go, gosh dang it, Thomas, you never remember anything. That's why they're going to call you Doubting Thomas from here on out. No, he didn't say anything. He just said, let me help you believe. He even gave into his weirdness. It was like, yeah, you can poke it, right? Whatever Jesus, he's there for you, all right? He's going to do what you need to do to believe. But what's even better than that is that the other disciples, his friends who did believe at that time, didn't kick him out. They didn't say, Thomas, if you don't believe, you don't belong here. Go home and figure it out and come back. They said, it's okay, you can keep coming. We all believe, we know that Jesus will show up and that you will believe again. Just stay here with us. Right? The goal of deconstructing when people start is always to reconstruct. Right? And usually they do. It's just whether or not they're going to bring the church back into it or not. And that's on us. We need to be a safe place for people to come and say, I want to rebuild with you. Jude 1:22 says, and you must show mercy to those whose faith is wavering. Must. That's a command. to show mercy to people when their faith is wavering. Paul says in Romans 14:1, he says, accept other believers who are weak in their faith. Don't argue with them about what they think is right or wrong. Right? How often do people end up leaving because they come in a moment of doubt and weakness, in faith that's wavering, and say, I just don't know how to do this, and people choose to argue instead. Right? Maybe we need to lean a little more towards acceptance and less into arguments. Right? We don't want to push out the people who are struggling. This is the place for them to come struggle. So practical steps to being a church that the doubtful can belong to. We have to remember there are no bad questions. Right? Did you ever hear that in school? And then you ask a question, they're like, it's not a great question, But in schools, right, teachers encourage learning by telling their students, ask any question. Right? It's how we're raised, but often when we come to church and people ask questions about things that are uncomfortable, and we don't want to talk about it, we say, that's a little bit taboo, or I don't really know about that. How about you just keep that to yourself? Because they're going to go ask that question somewhere. And most likely it's going to be Google. Right? And they're going to find all sorts of things, which is fine. We're going to talk about that later too. But we should be a place that wants to talk with their questions. Man, there's a lot of questioning, and it's been of Christian faith, and it's been there from the very beginning. Right? It's not new when someone comes and goes, what's up with this eternal punishment of hell? Like, what does that really mean? Can we talk about that? Or how does Jesus' blood actually wash away my sins? Like, what is up with that? Like, how is that real? Or why do you interpret the Bible this way? Or why does it say this and that, and these things seem to contradict? And even just the very existence of God, we tend to kind of push back in the church and be like, no, you're just supposed to believe it. But we need to give room for them to question and to talk about it. Secondly, we need to value connection over certitude. The philosopher Paul Tillich famously said, the opposite of faith is not doubt, but certainty. Right? Because if you are certain, you no longer have faith. Right? And without faith, it's impossible to please God. Right? There's a massive amount of what we do as Christians and how we live our life that involves faith, involves believing. But believing also means that there's moments of doubting, because you got to work through that and figure that out. And we often want to equate the strength of our faith to how free of doubt we are. Right? We want to replace faith with certainty. The reality is when you have doubt and you still choose to believe, that's faith. Right? When you're like, nah, this has to be the only way, and you're certain about it, it's no longer faith. The theologian Greg Boyd calls this quest for certainty an idol in his book, The Benefit of Doubt. He says that when we reduce faith to a psychological gimmick, if having faith means a rightness of belief instead of a commitment to God's character, right, then he urges us to think of salvation more as a covenantal relationship with God rather than a certainty of belief. Right? Having doubts, especially in seasons of pain, where you feel like your prayers maybe are bouncing off walls, you're talking to an empty sky, right, or in the face of tragedies, having doubt in those moments is a very human response. Even the most passionate believers walk through seasons of doubt. Our faith is more than a psychological gimmick designed to make us into single-focused people who check off, doctrinal beliefs, right? Like, I believe that, I believe that, I believe that. Like, faith is a relationship, and so there takes moments of just trusting it. Lastly, talk freely about doubt. Right? Share your stories of doubt. Be open that you are struggling when you're struggling. When we embrace our core value of being authentic, it becomes pretty easy to just be like, I'm struggling this week to believe this stuff. And it's okay, right? Because that's going to allow other people to feel like they belong to Christ. So if you're doubting today, if you're struggling to believe, you belong here. Secondly, we want to be a place to belong for those who have felt like they are too sad or too depressed. The comedian Louis C.K. says, sadness is poetic. You're lucky to live sad moments. Right? He was trying to convince Conan of the ills of using smartphones because they often distract us from being sad. right? Instead of like wanting to sit in our pain or sit in the feelings we have, I can just scroll endlessly on social media. And he's talking about one day he started to feel sad. Louis C.K. is driving down the road, and he wanted to just reach from his phone to just numb his mind. But instead he just pulled over and just let himself weep. And he said that it was really one of the most beautiful moments of his life. He was able to delve past the superficial and temporary fixes the world tries to offer and just feel his authentic emotions. See, our wider culture doesn't grasp this, right? There's thousands of books published on the subject of happiness every year. The modern industrial machine pumps out consumer goods and media with the goal of eliminating sadness, or at least distracting us from it. But the realities of life can be unbearably hard. When pain and loss inevitably come our way, our sad feelings need a safe place to be processed instead of quickly brushed off. But often the church, which perhaps wants to be seen as this place of light and hope, does not always provide the refuge for the sad Christian. Right? We preach that Jesus is the answer because we believe it. Most of us know it because God has rescued us from something. But we want to be quick to prove it. Right? We showcase our best examples of changed lives. Right? Our most moving stories of redemption, and often that is because there is someone who went through a hardship and saw an end to it. The problem is when we only report stories of victories after the triumph, we minimize those who are still going through battles. Right? We begin to invalidate their pain that's been ongoing. Instead of affirming them in their place of grief, we're often, in effect, communicating that you should be healing faster. Right? This should be getting taken care of. You have Jesus in your life. Right? When we teach that God will only be giving glory post-redemption, that there's no glory in the story of suffering, there's only glory when God fulfills the testimony. Right? We deny those that are still looking for the redemption. The people who are staying faithful through their suffering. Right before Resurrection Sunday, there was defeat, betrayal, loneliness, the suffering of a cross. In our eagerness to reach triumph, we begin to marginalize those who are in seasons of struggles. Sad people feel as if they must remain in the shadows, right? Put on the smile to be here at church and not really feel what's going on. How many of you guys have ever seen the original Lego movie? Right? Okay. This matters, okay? I'm not just like taking a random poll. No bad questions, okay? You guys are so quick to judge. Man, we got to go back and work on the first one, it looks like. But there's a song in there. It's like the theme song. Everything is awesome, right? The verse one of it says, have you ever heard the news of everyone talking? Life is good because everything is awesome. I lost my job. There's new opportunity, more free time for my awesome community. I feel more awesome than an awesome possum. I dip my body in chocolate frosting. It's very weird. 3 years later, I wash off the frosting, smelling like blossom. Everything is awesome. I stepped in mud, got new brown shoes. It's awesome to win, and it's awesome to lose. We expect Christian life to be like that. Everything is awesome. It's always awesome. It's awesome possum frosting or something. Right? We expect, and so we want that for ourselves. We try and show people that. We kind of avoid the uncomfortable situations where people are like, my life's not quite so awesome. And you're like, no, everything is awesome. Sing the song, man. Right? We don't share what's going on in our lives because we know it's going to make people uncomfortable. Right? We say we're living the dream. Right? And just as Brian says, we just don't say whether we're living the nightmare part or the actual dream. Because everything is not always awesome. I worked in sales for a while. One of our leading salespeople said, hey, when someone says, how are you? You just say, unbelievable. Right? Because it could be unbelievably bad or sad, or everything, but it's unbelievable no matter what. So you don't got to lie. You just get to say it's unbelievable, right? But man, that's what we're taught, right? To not be real, to not be authentic, when the reality is life is hard. Jesus promised that everything is not going to be awesome. John 16:33, he says, I have told you all of this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows. But take heart, I've overcome the world. Now, when it says take heart, it doesn't say put back on a smile. Act like nothing's happening. He says, no, just understand, take heart, like hold fast, because I am redeeming everything. At some point, it doesn't mean that right now everything will be better. Right? He promised that he'll lead us through the valley of the shadow of death. Isaiah promises that when we go through the fire, through the floods, through all of the hardship, he will be there. Right? That's more promise than everything is awesome. Man, our world does not want to allow pain. Honestly, I just don't think we have time for it. Right? It's just like, you got too much stuff to do to be sad. Just get to work. Go do stuff. And when you go to the store and you're like in the checkout line, you're like, hey, how you doing? You just expect them to say, I'm fine. Like, that's good. They say something else, you're like, wait, what? I wasn't expecting that. Yeah. We even expect people to be doing better. Right? That's often our first thing. Man, I heard what's happening. Are you doing better? Right? We push people beyond maybe where they're really at. I love how Job's friends treated him after he lost everything. If you don't know the story of Job, it's a book in the Old Testament. But Job lost literally everything. In a very, very short amount of time, he lost his home. He lost his job, basically. He lost all the animals that he shepherded. He lost all of his wealth. He lost all of his kids. He even lost his own health. He was just in extreme pain. Extreme sorrow. And in Job 2, 11 through 13, it says, when 3 of Job's friends heard the tragedy he had suffered, they got together and traveled from their homes to comfort and console him. Their names were Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. But when they saw Job from a distance, they scarcely recognized him. Wailing loudly, not Job wailing loudly, their friends that saw Job began to wail loudly. They tore their robes. They threw dust into the air over their heads to show their grief. And they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights. No one said a word to Job, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words. Could you imagine if they showed up and said, man, I heard something happen. You doing better? They showed up and, in the kindness of their heart, they were there and say, how can I help you? We're going to get through this together. If you just pick yourself up, start making a step forward today, it's all going to be better. God works all things out for the good of those who love him, and that he loves. Yes, all of those things are great, true statements. But when someone is suffering, when someone is in pain, it's not always helpful at that time. What is helpful is your presence coming to be there. Man, they cried, they grieved with him, and they just sat with him for a week. Depression can also be a disease, right? An invisible disease that we don't often see. I don't know if you've noticed, but I don't shy away from discussing those things here. But often, if you haven't experienced yourself, you don't understand it. You don't know what it is. You don't know how to grasp it. And sometimes it feels like I'm not even really sure it's a real thing. Right? And it makes sense for you to feel that way because you haven't experienced it. But I want you to maybe consider physical illnesses that you don't see in other people. Right, that you can't fully understand their pain or what they're going through or what the cancer is doing inside their body that you can't see with your eye, but you understand that they are in pain and that something needs to be done for them to be healed and to be brought to wholeness again. Right, and if we can understand that we don't hesitate to seek the medical community for medical solutions to physical issues, we also can't judge Christians who seek out mental help for mental issues. right? The study of the mind is opening up so many possibilities and treatment options over the last few years for people who struggle with mental illness. And we should come alongside and support those who are exploring those options with wisdom, not in fear. Right now, I know that we all know stories of things that have gone wrong out there in that same world. And so we want to be prayerful for them, and we want to care about them and make sure the right things are happening there. But we can't, when we over-spiritualize mental illness, it usually leads us to victimizing suffering people who really just need help. So practical steps for helping those who are sad or depressed. Don't try to fix it. Let people grieve. Right? Usually, you don't need to say anything. And how are you doing? Not, are you getting better? Where's the light at the end of the tunnel? Or any of these sort of things. Just, how are you doing? If there's an opportunity to share that you have something similar you've been through, not to force them to have steps to make it better, but to share so that they don't feel alone. That's a good possibility. But remember, everything is not awesome. Secondly, walk alongside them. Like Job's friends, just be there. Be present in their community and in their space. Most often, people who are struggling with depression or going through hard times don't want to get out and go out into the world. So that usually means, like Job's friends, taking time out of your life to go to where they are. Right? And just like Job's friends did, throw some dirt on yourself so you don't, but the reality is, don't come up showing up in your best. Be real with them. In that same way, walk alongside them. And third, care for them and their family. Right? Sometimes those closest to them are also suffering because of it. Right? And it could be a great help for us to just come along and support. Provide food or meals or care for the things that they're going through. Take their children for a night so that they can, talk or whatever things look like. Just help out. So if everything is not awesome for you, you belong here. Thirdly, sometimes we want to be a place for people to belong to that feel like maybe they're too old or they're too young or too single. Right? Many young Christians are raised and counseled to believe forming a biblical family is the most faithful way to live a Christian life. In youth group, they're taught to save themselves for marriage. It's drilled on how to pick a godly spouse. In church, sermons can tend to be directed towards married couples or families so that a narrative of faithful Christian life is shaped only within marital commitment. Right? People begin to hear that ultimately forming a new family is the desired ideal script for a Christian. That singleness is just a season of preparation for this sacred calling. But we live in a world that most of that is not very true in where we live. The average age people getting married is pushed off much longer in life now, and it's just a lot of it's due to culture, some of it's just decisions and stuff, but people are staying single much longer. We have many, many, many different versions of blended families, which is people who've been divorced and remarried or different, family dynamics, and we can't expect everybody to hold to the same ideal. Right? Many of the older folk, as their family has grown and moved on or moved out in life, maybe they're now widowed or widowers, feel as though they've outlived that main script. Right? I've already had that. Now what does my life look like? Am I just retired? Am I just sidelined now? The problem with sidelining elderly people or segregating community life by age is that we begin to miss out on the different perspectives offered by people who've experienced things different than us, especially the older generation that's experienced the long run of life. Right? The gift of perspective from other people can do wonders for people trapped in your own anxiety to know that other people have been there, done that, and got through it. Stories told from people who have lived and seen more years complement the vigor of youth. The core of the church mission is strengthened when every generation is able to weigh in. Now, this process isn't always easy, right? Sometimes the cynicism of the older generation pours cold water on the young people's hot ideas, right? We've already tried that before. We did it and it didn't work back in the 1920s. I'm just kidding. But, right, these young people, they're always up to that. But at the same time, then the young generation doesn't want to listen because it's like, nah, we've got it figured out because we're young. We always have everything figured out. We need to learn to listen better, to sharpen one another with respect. Studies show that most of the disciples were young adults, possibly even teenagers, when Jesus entrusted them to build the church. We need the passion and the vigor of the young just as much as we need the wisdom and the resources and the fruit of the older generation to continue to build the church. Man, we don't believe that children and the youth and the young adults are the future of this church. Right? They're the today of this church. Right? We're all the today of this church. Right? If you want to participate in some ministry in our church, we want you to find that place. That we don't want to limit it to age groups or the different things. We just believe in you. Right? Pastor Noah needs some wisdom and life experience on his ministry team. Right? To deal with youth. Youth need grandmas and grandpas in their youth ministry. You do not understand that the young generation of this world is just considered the fatherless generation. They don't have steady parents. Their households are often a mess because of all those blended families. And to have good, just caring adults of different generations pouring into their life means and changes the world for them. You know, to be honest, it's hard to build a church that's geared to all ages. It's hard for me to get up here even just to speak on a message that's geared to all ages. Right? From 14-year-olds that's sitting here from week to week to, the young adults, the singles, the married with kids, to empty nesters, to recently retired, to widows, like that. There's a lot of life happening here. That's why we need each other. As Noah talked about a few weeks ago, our church isn't supposed to be a place to sit and receive only, right? But a place that you're engaged in. If you feel church is not geared for you, I want to have a conversation with you. I want to help you to find a place, but know that it's going to include, are you gathering in community? Right? Are you gathering in and out of this church with other people? Are you growing in your spiritual disciplines? Are you discipling someone? Man, we need that. We need your experience if you're older. And for young people, you need that passion. Did you know that in senior living homes and things, they've started partnering with preschools and younger things to bring in kids, and it's added years of life to their average age of the people that they're there because of the vigor and the excitement of just having people who are younger around. Right? If you want to keep living longer, just never stop having children. I think that was what that means. No, I'm just kidding. No, but man, we need each other for life. People from the age of 6 in the Bible, probably even younger, to literally hundreds of years old, were mightily used by God to make a difference. Right? We need all of you. So practical steps to help everyone belong in this. Mutual participation in family life. Right? Invite others to be a part of your family life. Singles, old and young, often miss the family-like community that they maybe once had or we talk about at church. Invite them to join you for family dinners, holidays, events, right? Invite them to your kids' birthday parties and vice versa. Adopt a child, adopt a grandparent, I don't know, whatever it looks like for you and your family, maybe both. Right? Intergeneration community life. Right? In a similar way that you don't feel that you need to volunteer or join small groups that are only to the similar spot you are in life. Right? Even more so in disciple relationships, find people that are different than you and connect with them. We need each other. It's also okay to be in a group with people that are similar, though, because it helps you realize you're not alone in the things you're going through as well. Just both are needed. And then I also believe we can just do a better job at honoring singles, right? We celebrate a lot of married type things. You got engagements and, bridal showers and then the wedding, and then later they're having babies, and you got all those things and stuff. But for singles, often it feels overlooked when they're hitting milestones in their lives too, whether it be, a big career change or graduating from school or, retirement or different things. We can be celebrating those things as well. There's no such things as too young, too old, or too single here, right? You belong. And lastly, we want to be a place to belong for those who feel like they're too smart. Right? Suppose a medical professional has gone through decades of schooling. Right? They've been trained to become an expert in their field, and they come to church seeking communion with God and fellowship with the other believers. But they encounter teachings that are in direct contradiction to everything they've been taught in their academic or professional career. Right? In some circles, for example, vaccinations are contested from a religious standpoint. Right? And that's okay if that's what you believe. But, if they grew up, if they went through all this school in the scientific community and they believe that they are doing a life-saving thing as well, right, we have to help them to be able to hold both here. Right? How do they interact with religious teachings that are polarized against their own training? Right? We often cause people to have a dichotomy set up inside of them where they have to compartmentalize their work and their religious life. And God never called us to separate all these things. He called us to bring them together so that we can move forward in one bodiness and unity. Mark Knoll, he's a historian of American Christianity. He published a book called The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind in 1994. Do you guys know what the scandal of the evangelical mind is? That there is no mind. That's literally what I say. I studied it and dug into it. There's nothing. Right? They don't lean into the intellectual of anything, and he rewrote it, and he came back to his studies 10 years later, and I think another time since, and said it's only gotten worse. Polls have shown that most non-Christians just assume they're smarter than Christians. Most Christians they assume most Christians are uneducated or just generally dumb. It's probably my fault. But in America, evangelicals comprise a demographic of people with relative wealth, status, political influence. Yet historically, evangelicals have not invested in higher research. They refuse to engage in first-order public discourse. According to Knoll, evangelicals are almost completely absent from in-depth interaction in the worlds of science, politics, and the arts. Do you know that most of our elite schools were started by Christians years and years ago who said, intelligence, knowledge, these are things that would be helpful to gain from, and they started these amazing facilities for people to come in and dig really, really deep into philosophy, into what is life, into all these things. And now those schools lean very far away from Christian thought because we've separated ourselves out from them. And it used to be that's where everything leaned towards. The reason Knoll says is that evangelicals value short-term success over long-term intellectual development. The evangelical obsession with end-time literature and knowledge-centered theology contributes to us over-spiritualizing earthly realities and an urgency to convert souls that take priority over faithfulness in tending to our current world realities. Right, we tried to make things too spiritual to where we miss out on there's actual needs in our world around us and things that we could be involved in and making a bigger difference. There's also a paralyzing fear of liberalism and secular research methods that compel evangelicals to take a posture of defense. The scandal of evangelical mind is scandalous indeed when the church marginalizes evangelicals who are serving God through their careers with professionalism. Right? Their faith becomes an obstacle rather than a source of encouragement. And we've separated that being a professional and going through all those years of school to go in and do well in your job to make a difference can't be together with being a faithful Christian. And so people have to live separate lives to live in that realm. The director of the Human Genome Project, I'm blanking on his name right now, believes in God. But he hasn't been able to faithfully attend everywhere because a lot of his research has disproved things that Christians once held on to. And so he feels completely pushed out of church and is basically pursuing faith on his own. There's lots of interviews, you can look it up. But man, he's a guy who wants to believe in God. He's making massive difference and change in our world scientifically and cannot find a place in church because of intelligence, because of what he is studying, and we need to be a place that can bring both of those things together. Right? As Christians, we often just live in defense mode. right? We've tried to maintain holiness separate from the world, by standing guard against those ideas that are outside of our bubbles of thought. It's caused our conversations with those outside of Christianity to become reactions because of our fear. Instead of healthy dialogue, right, we want to give everything a black and white label, right? That it's either you're with us or you're against us, right? And we can't come to middle grounds and just discuss these things, right? Growing up evangelical in the 90s, I was taught to fear anything that was secular or liberal. So much stuff was thrown away, right? Pokemon cards, Harry Potter books, CDs, like all these things are like, whoa, I don't know if those can be Christian things, and literally there's this giant trend of just like burning parties. And it's like, I don't know if that makes us look more like Jesus or more like the people in the woods we try and stay away from. Right? But now church started cancel culture, and now that's backfired on us. The problem with a stance of reaction and defense is we begin to withdraw further and further into our own worldview. Right? We set up everything as us versus them. And instead of taking God's light out into the world, we just set up a tent and say, this light is ours. In an attempt to draw people of common faith together, we made false assumptions that everybody here thinks the same way, believes the same things. And so then we don't even get a chance to practice respectful conversations and dialogue in a healthy environment of the church. In the society that we live in, it's just full of ideas, right? For the longest time before internet and the networking that's happening around the world, there was basically gatekeepers of ideas, like these leading professors or theologians or different things through their schools. They maybe have students who are coming up with new ideas, but it filters through them before it goes out into the world, and everything had to be published. And, everybody read through all of these journals before it actually went out. But now anybody's an expert, right? They got a TikTok with like 4,000 views, expert, right? Like, who cares what they're saying? Did you know that outside of April Fools, you still shouldn't believe everything that's on the internet? Right? Like, I think there's people who believe April 1st is the only day. The rest of the year, everything on the internet, totally believable. Right? I don't care who says it. I don't care what their background is. I don't care anything. It's just true. And so we have ideas just rampantly running everywhere for us to grab onto. And yet, even within that, we start to only like the things that we already agree with, and then we build a tunnel that we just stay focused in. And we feel like, the world all agrees with me, and we're not open to hear the things that are actually going on everywhere. Right? The more widespread it's become, the more narrow-minded we've become as a church. We must contend for our faith out of our thoughtful convictions, not out of fear. Right? When we come with fear, we put up defense and walls. When we come with thoughtful convictions, we want to hear. We want to say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't believe correctly. Maybe I need to be more open-minded in here. In Matthew 13:52, Jesus says this. He says, every teacher of religious law who becomes a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like a homeowner who brings from his storeroom new gems of truth as well as old. Jesus understood that new truth would come to us. Do you know that, Jesus was saying, hey, those religious teachers that know everything about the law, there's some new things coming. And this is a continuation thing, that if we are disciples in the kingdom of heaven, that new truths will come. Right? We're really quick to just put everything off. No, I have everything I need already in the Bible. It's there, it's this things. But new truths, new gems can come from the storehouse. Right? Because our world is changing. The things we're going through are different than what was written in scripture times. Right? You guys like, no, I think they're the same. He's like, did you ride your donkey here? Right. My car was 1 horsepower. Yeah, that's hilarious. Come on, guys. All right, so 1 donkey power, is that better? I've lost all train of thought. Man, guys, just understand that we don't need to protect the ideas of God from secular reasoning, from the liberal agenda. Right? On the contrary, in order to become critical thinkers, while clarifying our views of God, we must become students of the philosophies, the theories, the ideas in the prevailing schools of thought. We should understand what the world is searching after so that we can use it and participate in those conversations to learn more about God, but to also hopefully bring those people to God. I love Paul knew his culture in the Bible. He shows up and they're worshiping all these gods and he understands what they're thinking, and he goes through and he starts conversations with them based on the things and the thoughts of the most recent philosophers of their time. Also understand that God is big enough to defend himself. Right? His truth will always come to light. That's a promise. You don't have to do that. So practical steps to embrace those who are too smart. Obviously, education. Right? Believe in it. Right? Don't fear education. Let those who are deeper thinkers and academically, not me, obviously, gifted, pursue education. Also, we can all be lifelong learners. Right? We all should be people of continued education. The moment you close your mind to learning something new is the moment you stop growing. I believe that with everything. Right? Then also, learn from the other side. Right? Read from authors you don't agree with. Listen to their TED Talks. Listen to their podcasts. You don't have to be a subscriber. You don't have to give them money, right? Okay? But listen to it with an open mind, not just to build arguments, but hear them out. Some of the most growth in my faith has come by listening to people who believe things that I don't believe. That's only strengthened what I believe and how. There's one time I was listening to a guy who was like, I just don't understand. Like, if Christians really believed they were going to heaven, and heaven is this wonderful place, why do they always try and scare people there by hell? Right? Like, most people are motivated by good things. We know that, right? You don't beat your dog, you give him a treat or something, right? Like, motivate them with the good stuff. And I was like, man, that's true. Like, I should just want heaven so bad that I don't even have to care about what the bad side of things could be. And I should be able to preach in a way that draws people that way. Have healthy dialogue. Actually listen to others. Like, actually listen. We'll have a whole thing about that in our next series. But, like, first, just engage with people who are different than you. Don't be afraid of them. They're humans. They probably won't bite. Engage with people who are different than you in healthy conversation. Don't just listen to respond with arguments, but listen to understand and hear them. Right? Become a place where it's safe to discuss where faith and society and knowledge and science and all those things mix. Be okay to have conversations there and realize that you don't have to come to a conclusion. You don't even have to agree. You don't even have to say, we'll have to agree to disagree here. Right? You can just be like, man, that was a great conversation. I'm glad we had that today. There's a church that started in downtown Denver, considered one of the most atheist neighborhoods in the U.S. They started with in a coffee shop. They asked the coffee shop, can we rent the space out on like Thursday nights? And they're like, sure. And so they put up signs, and it was like, basically like, if you come ask a Christian anything you want type of thing. And this atheist guy showed up first and was just like there to prove him wrong. And they just had open conversation. The next week he's like, I'm going to definitely prove you wrong. So I'm going to bring 5 of my atheist friends here. And so they basically started a small group, right, called like Atheist Anonymous or something. But within a year, those 5 people that came that second week were believers and helped them plant a church in that very same coffee shop. Because they were just open to have conversations with people who are different than them. Break down the walls between secular and sacred. Honoring and celebrating the work of each person, regardless of what field they are in, frees people up to figure out how to be faithful within their chosen career instead of feeling like they need to choose between their passion and doing the holier work of ministry. Right? To understand that those doctors or those lawyers or those people can go and do their job at the best of their ability and still be a light in a place that they are at. Right? And that we should be able to support them there. We also need to not be threatened by critical thinking and public engagement with people of different faiths and philosophies. There we go. It's a bad day to not be able to read, guys. They're like, I'm not going to talk to that guy if I have intelligent things to say. Man, not everyone within the community of faith will land on the same positions after healthy debates. It's to our benefit to work hard in preparing a table big enough for all of the conversation partners to gather around. But also understand that all these different stories can exist all on the same plane, and we don't have to be in full agreement there to be able to move forward the mission of Christ. We have room here for those who are too smart to belong. Now, you might need to find a smarter pastor, but Noah will do that for you. Now, many of these topics felt like they have similar themes to the practical side, right? Listening to the different voices, make space for those who would feel that they're outsiders of the church community, to not fear our differences, but see what we can learn instead. Right? These things don't come naturally to us. We are prone to seek out similarities because they are comfortable. Just as muscles require resistance to strengthen, the more we expose ourselves to people who are different than us, the more we can live in the discomfort of that tension. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu wisely stated, differences are not intended to separate, to alienate. We are different precisely in order to realize our need of one another. Man, the church is in for some surprises when she opens her doors to all people. How uncomfortable it can make her feel, but also how rich and beautiful it is to experience the brilliant array of all the different perspectives that people can bring. Right now, this message is in no way all the people who have felt left out by the church. There's some of the main themes that I feel like we don't do a good job meeting that is fairly general. But you can apply many of these same practices to help anyone belong. Even those groups you might have thought I was going to be talking about today. If you want to dig deeper into this idea of belonging, there's a book that I took a lot of today's stuff from called Outside In by Cindy Brandt. It's really great, just short read about it. But I also want to throw out today, if any of those things have ever kept you from furthering your decision with Christ to be baptized or to follow him, the fact that Jesus hasn't healed you from your sickness or your sadness. Maybe you still have moments of doubt and you're like, I can't be baptized because I'm still doubting. Maybe you just felt like you haven't fit in the mainstream vision of church. Right? Or you just don't belong. Well, I hope you feel that you belong here. And if you want to be baptized, we do have that happening next week. You can sign up in our app. Now, there's so much more I could say on these topics that I've already kept you way too long. But come back next week for Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, the new series we're starting, and we'll be digging into a lot more of what does this stuff really, really mean. And I hope that today, not only do you feel that you belong here, but that you can see where you can help other people belong as well and help us define our culture and help people get into the current of our church that Jesus has given us. So let's pray. God, we just thank you so much for everything that you are, God, that you died for all people, for everyone. God, no matter how different we are from the people around us, no matter how sad or happy, no matter, how our life has been being played out, no matter our sufferings or our rejoicing. God, no matter the gifts that you've given us, Lord, that you have died for us all, God, and that you want everybody to belong to your church. God, I pray that you would help us to have that same heart. God, in those moments where we realize that we're fearing something different, that we would put down that fear, God, and go in your boldness to reach out to them. God, as you showed us many times through Scripture, that you went to those people nobody else would go to. And I pray that we would respond in that same way with love and care for those around us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right, so before you guys leave, we got one quick announcement, but go and help others belong today.